And you may be seated. Good morning, Westminster. It's wonderful to see everyone here this morning. We are in the third week of a 3-week sermon series on Proverbs. So this is the last time you have to hear anything resembling common sense from the sermon. We're done with it after this. What we've been doing over the last 2 weeks is we've gone over some of the major themes in Proverbs that the writer uses to teach the readers about how to live well. So if you read through Proverbs, you know that there's no storyline, there's no narrative. It's a bunch of axioms, a bunch of proverbs all put together. But if you read the whole book, you see themes emerge. And so we talked about the theme of self-discipline in the book the first week. We talked about the theme of words, the power of words in the book the second week. This morning, we're going to talk about another major theme throughout the book of Proverbs, although we've only got one proverb for you this morning, and that's this one, Proverbs 13:20. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise. The companion of fools suffers harm. And what this proverb illustrates for us is a theme that actually runs throughout the book that is eliminated in this particular proverb, but is continuing throughout the book, that is basically this: the company you keep matters. The company you keep matters. Now remember, this book was originally written to 13-year-old boys, and any of you who have 13-year-old boys at home have probably given this sermon before. This is not an unusual sermon for you to give. I think where it interacts with our experience is that as we've gone along in time and gone along in culture and gone along in age, we're all adults in this room, the message of what we're supposed to take out of this gets muddled a little bit. And so what I want to do is I want to take a step back and look at this kind of broad theme: the company you keep matters. The companion of wise, or wise, the companion of fools suffers harm. And I want to ask what that could mean for us, grown-ups sitting here in the, I'm assuming we're all grown-ups, right? Grown-ups sitting here in the 21st century here today. And I think the basic themes we get out of it are twofold, that are still relevant to us, even though we are not 13-year-old boys in ancient Israel. And the first one is basically this: our attention, especially our attention in relationships, is much more powerful than we tend to think it is. So if last week the basic theme of the sermon is your words are more powerful than you think they are, if you missed that one, you can go back and listen to it on the website. The theme of this sermon, this theme throughout Proverbs, is that your attention in relationships is more powerful, more formative than you think it is. So there's an ancient Jewish parable about a man who walks into a perfume shop and buys nothing. But because he has spent so long in the perfume shop, when he comes out, everywhere he goes, he smells like that perfume shop. And it's like ancient version of Bath and Body Works, right? And the writers of the parable said that is how our relationships are. We don't have to buy anything. The time that we spend around people influences us, so that we tend to become like those with whom we keep company. We tend to be formed, to be shaped by those with whom we keep company. And I think one of the things that has changed in our society today is we simply have underestimated that power. The same way we underestimate the power of language, the power of words, we underestimate the power of relationship, the power of attention. And the truth is, you know this is true in the depths of your heart. You are formed, you are shaped, you are changed by those with whom you are in relationship. And if we're thinking about what that means as Christians, I think the first implication would have to be this, which is that no one becomes holy by themselves. No one becomes holy by themselves. Because we are a very individualistic culture, we like to think that being Christian and having a relationship with God is as much as taking up my Bible, going out to the woods, sitting by myself with my Bible, communing alone with God, and having a relationship. That concept is not only foreign to the Bible, that is foreign to the way Christianity has been practiced since the beginnings of Christianity and before then. Because every other culture has recognized that relationship is one of the most powerful things in our lives. And they have recognized that if you and I want to become the people God wants us to become, then we have to be around people who are already on that journey. We have to be physically in relationship with, we have to spend time with, we have to pay attention to people who are already on that journey somewhere. And if we are trying to go off by ourselves in the woods, read a Bible, I've heard so many hunters give me this argument. My hunting is my spiritual discipline. That is great. I'm glad you pray in the deer blind. Doesn't make up for church. So it's fine to go out by yourself in the middle of the woods. What we have lost as a culture is the understanding that that is never going to be enough. Because if you are surrounded in your personal life, in your relationship life, by people who are not on the same journey that you are on, by people who are living life unintentionally, by people who have no desire to become who God wants them to be, and no desire to see God's dreams fulfilled in the world, you are not going to make that journey yourself. You're just not. Because the relationship is a central part of what helps us on this journey together. This is why in the early church, they thought belonging was as important, if not more important, than belief. When you came in, when you started expressing interest in this crazy new religion called Christianity, they didn't even teach you the creed until after you had been in church for a significant period of time. Because they thought the first thing you needed to do is you needed to belong. You needed to come into community. You needed to make relationships. You needed to see how it was that Christians lived. You needed to see how it was that Christians did things. You needed to be a part of the community for a while. And then once you started to belong, then they would teach you the crazy things that Christianity believes. That in fact, God died to save you. God died to save the world, and that God, through the church, is saving the world, and you get to be a part of it. And as people went through that journey together, it was the belief and the belonging together that then shaped them into people who were willing to withstand martyrdom at the hands of the Roman Empire rather than renounce their faith. And we in the 21st century, who live in the religion of I can get my Bible and go to my deer blind and get as much Jesus as I want to, live in a society where we will renounce our faith if the Super Bowl comes on, much less if there is an outside force persecuting us. We have lost the understanding that Proverbs is teaching us. Relationship matters, company matters, the attention that you have to give within your relationships matters. And that matters for your holiness, that matters for your lack of holiness. And I want to say one of the ways that I think this plays itself out in our culture specifically, and the Bible could never have anticipated this, we now live in an era where our relational attention can be taken by people who do not even know we exist, because there's this thing called television, and there's this thing called media. And there are all kinds of things that we can effectively spend our relational attention, whether it is whatever TV show is hot right now. I have a toddler, I don't have time to watch them. But you know better than I do. Whatever TV show is hot right now, whatever reality show is hot right now, whatever is coming through the media sources that gets our attention has the same formative relationship with us as our in-person relationships. And so one of the things we have to consider as Christians, as you are so if you think about your relationships as that perfume shop, when I go in, I'm going to start looking like these people. I'm going to start smelling like these people. Do you want to go through your life smelling like the Kardashians? Do you want to go through your life looking like the people who get your attention? Because whether you recognize it or not, that is what happens. It's just a law of nature. That is what happens. You begin to be formed by the people to whom you give your attention the same way you would absorb the odors of walking into a perfume shop. Now for Christians, of course, we could trace that line. I could give you 30 more minutes of sermon on that line alone. But for Christians, we kind of have to make a transition here because there's a wrinkle in the story. Our story doesn't stop with Proverbs. You see, the people who originally heard Proverbs and were taught Proverbs got that lesson very well. So well that they began to make strict divisions between who was good company and who was poor company. And they began to teach that it was clean to keep company with the holy people and unclean to keep company with the unrighteous people. And those divisions became so entrenched that by the time Jesus came around, there was a very, very strict rule in place about who you could eat with, whose roof you could sit under, et cetera, so that anyone outside this very tight-knit circle of holiness was excluded from the community. If you were a tax collector, if you were a prostitute, if you were a Gentile, if you were not within the circle of Jewish righteousness, you were not considered good company, and therefore you were an outsider. And then for Christians, we have this radical story of this carpenter coming on the scene and breaking all of those rules. And it's the first thing he does. He decides he's going to go eat with the tax collectors. And he is going to go talk with the prostitutes. And he is going to go keep company with all of those that the Jewish law considered unclean and unrighteous. Now you remember, all of those rules came into place from a very good intention. It was this idea in Proverbs that good company matters and good company is formative, and all of those rules were put in place for good reasons, and they went crazy with him. And what happens with Jesus, when Jesus comes on the scene, is he says that can't be the full story. If all you are going to do is be around the people who are holy, you will end up ignoring the people I love most deeply in this world, the people I came to save. And so what happens when Jesus comes on this earth is he takes this principle, keep good company principle, and he nuances it so that the life of holiness is no longer a life lived in a bubble, but a life that gets formed by holy relationships, but then freely goes out into the world to build formative relationships with the people who most need what Jesus has to offer. And the image that we see from Jesus is that when Jesus walks out and he eats with the prostitutes and he eats with the tax collectors and he does all of these things, it is though he is bringing the perfume shop with him. And he does not come away with their scent, they come away with his. And he then is able to spread the grace of God and the love of God and the holiness of God to people who were cut off from it at the time. And so the nuanced position we find ourselves in today is that both of those are still true. Both of those are still true. If you surround yourself by people who live terrible lives, your life will start to look like theirs. That is true. If you put yourself in a bubble and cut off all relationship from the people who need God most, you will limit your usefulness to God, and that is also true. And so where the Christian finds herself today is this nuanced position where how do we do both? And the scriptural answer we get to how do we do both is that when we're thinking about where our relational attention goes, who we keep company with, who we have relationship with, the most important answer for us is that above and beyond anything else, we need to be keeping company with God so that his scent overwhelms us, so that then when we go out into the world, we bring that scent with us instead of the other way around. Do you see that principle? So because of who Jesus was, because of his identity, because of who he was marked to be and stamped to be, when he went out into the world, he brought the grace of God with him. He brought the scent of God with him. And you and I, as children of God in that same story, have the power to do the same if we allow ourselves to be shaped by the relationship with God. So this is a transition sermon because the entire next season that's coming, we're going to be talking about how that works. But I want to give you an image to go with. There was an early theologian called Athanasius who was asked once how it was that Christians became transformed, how it was that Christians changed. So people at that point were noticing this isn't just about belief, this isn't just about membership, this is about a change that happens. People, when they come into the faith, are one person. People, as they grow in the faith, become another kind of person. And he was asked how that happens. And he said, imagine sealing wax. Imagine hot sealing wax. If it is hot and if it is pliable, if it allows itself to be formed, then when the seal comes onto it, that sealing wax that was just a blob before now takes on an image. And it looks like the image of the one imprinted upon it. And he said that is exactly what happens to the Christian in community, in worship, in study, is that we expose ourselves to God like pliable sealing wax, and we allow his image to be imprinted upon us so that when we go out in the world, we are not the broken people we were. We are the grace of God. We are the scent of God. We are the breath of God. And you know, that is what we are supposed to be. There's a tradition within Christianity that all of these invisible realities we proclaim have visible symbols attached to them. Whenever I do a wedding, I talk about the ring as a visible symbol of an invisible commitment. When we do a baptism, we talk about the water as the visible symbol of an invisible grace. When we have communion, we talk about the bread and the wine as the visible symbol of the invisible forgiveness and grace and nourishment that is there for us. The teaching of Christianity is that you, all of us, who are saved by the grace of God, filled with the Spirit of God, washed in the blood of God, we are the visible symbol of an invisible God to the world. And if you think throughout your day, think throughout your coworkers, throughout your family, throughout your friends, throughout the people you come into contact with, there are people who will only experience the presence of God through you. There are people who will only smell the scent of God, feel the grace of God. There are people who will only get a hint that there is this invisible reality called the presence of God because you are in their life. And your relational power with them has the power to be the transformative effect that leads them into the same path of discipleship that the rest of us are on. That is the power of this principle, and that is why Christians have to take it seriously. That is why it's important to take seriously who we are being formed by, but it is also important to take seriously who we are allowing God to form through us, because that is the entire reason the church exists. And the ins and outs of how that works and what it looks like and how you and I open ourselves to this formative power of the Holy Spirit is exactly the journey that we're going to start when we start our next series next week. Would you join me in prayer?